Hi everybody, so I want to start this video with a little bit of a warning. I will be discussing murder and sexual stuff, topics of a sexual nature. So if any of that makes you uncomfortable, feel free to skip this video. I totally understand. As this is the part of my series where I'm starting to discuss criminals that have mental illness and some of the stuff that they did. Hi everybody. So like I said in my last video, I wanted to kind of start a series about discussing mental illnesses and then discussing criminals that were diagnosed at some point with those mental illnesses. So since I started with narcissism, I wanted to start this week's video. I wanted to start the series kind of going forward with BTK, Dennis Rader, the killer from the Kansas City, Wichita area. So he was eventually diagnosed with narcissism. People like Ted Bundy, like I said, Jodi Arias, people like that. And if you're not really sure what narcissism is, feel free to go check out my last video where I break it down a little bit more, make it a little more easy to understand. But like I said, this week we're going to be talking about BTK. So Dennis Rader was born in March of 1945. He was one of 4 sons. And both of his parents worked a lot, worked really long hours to provide for their family of 6. And Dennis, at least, says that he felt very neglected by his parents because they were never really around to take care of them. It was from his side, it sounds like they kind of had to fend for themselves a lot of the time. And especially he felt neglected by his mother. He felt that his mother is the one that should always be there for him as a kid, and she wasn't. So that kind of resentment actually affected him in a lot of ways and actually led him to some of his more sadistic thoughts. And from a really, really young age, he had some very words are hard, sadistic sexual fantasies. So a lot of them being he wanted to take advantage of helpless women, torturing them, torturing bound women, bound helpless women. And also from a young age, he exhibited what's called Zeus Sadism, which is the torturing of animals. The torturing, killing, and essentially displaying of dead animals. That was something that he got some level of enjoyment from. So kind of while I'm mentioning some of the sadistic things that he enjoyed, he also fantasized about things like autoerotic asphyxiation, voyeurism, cross-dressing. He was a peeping Tom as well. And just kind of a side note, anybody can be into whatever they're into, whether it be, cross-dressing, drag, BDSM, whatever. What you're into, as long as you're not hurting anybody else like he was, it's cool. Just don't hurt anybody else unless there's consent given. But he would actually watch women undress, watch his neighbors undress, and then he would actually steal women's panties and masturbate with them. And he also masturbated with ropes and bindings around his arms and and neck. Kind of like what I said, he had some of those like fantasies about torturing people, so that kind of tied in to why he wanted like the stuff around his neck and the autoerotic asphyxiation. So a couple side notes that I was able to find, just kind of generally what his neighbors thought of him. A little bit else that I was able to find about his background before all the murders started was, according to a lot of his neighbors, in like Park City, Wichita, Kansas City area, he was apparently very, very well mannered, considered a very, very nice neighbor, very polite. Not somebody that you would necessarily think of as a killer. And between 1966 and 1970, he did serve in the Air Force. I was not able to find what caused him to leave, why he decided to leave the Air Force just after the 4 years, but that was just kind of a side note. And in 1971, he moved to Park City, Kansas, which is, I believe, a suburb of Wichita. And he married Paula, I'm going to butcher her last name, but I'm going to attempt it, Dietz, I think, and they ended up having 2 kids together. So Dennis killed a total of 10 people, and there was a couple other attempts that he had made, but there were a couple people that got away. So I'll just go through a very quick list of the murders. And the murders range from 1974 to 1991. So about 17 years where he was killing people, kind of taunting the police and never getting caught. So in January 1974, he killed 5 people in the Odero family. In their home, they were found later on, a couple days after this happened. Everybody was dead. Parents, kids, everybody. In April of the same year, 1974, he killed Catherine Bright. In 1977, he killed 2 people. He killed Shirley Relford and Nancy Fox. In 1985, he killed Marie Hedge. In 1986, he killed Vicky Wegerle. And then 5 years after that, in 1991, he killed Dolores Davis. And like I said, there are some gaps in there, but he was also attempting to kill other people. And he was writing letters, sending packages to the media and police, taunting them, being like, hey, I'm killing all these people and I'm doing an amazing job of it. You know, you still haven't caught me. And just kind of making fun of them in a sense. And the letters and the packages, that's where kind of the narcissism, in a way, kind of gets him in more trouble. That's essentially what gets him caught in the end, is the fact that with narcissism, they want all the attention. They want that feeling of superiority, that they're doing something better than anybody else. And it seems for Dennis, now, mind you, I'm not a trained psychologist, psychiatrist, therapist. I don't have training in that. This is just kind of what I'm seeing based on what I know of narcissism and what I was able to find about Dennis Rader. It seems like his narcissism was why he was writing the letters, taunting the police, and sending the packages. And that's ultimately what got him caught, because he stopped for a while, for over a decade. There was never a letter written to the police or to the media. And then he started again because the attention was no longer there. And that's, like I said, what got him caught, is he started up again. So the first letter was in 1974, after the Odero murders. And he actually stashed the letter in an engineering book at the Wichita Public Library, that admitted doing it. It didn't give a name, of course, but it admitted to the Oduro family killings, and it described it in detail. So that kind of showed the police and media, okay, the person that wrote this is the person that killed this family, because it has details that were never released to the public. So the second letter was in 1978, and it was sent to KAKE TV station, claiming responsibility for the Odoros, Catherine Bright, Relford, and the Fox murders. And in that letter, he actually kind of started suggesting names for himself, names that he wanted to be referred to in the media. And BTK was the one that stuck. So he sent a second letter to the media in 1978. This one was demanding media attention, really announcing that Wichita had a serial killer, because up to this point, the police had been associating the killings with other murders that were in the area. They had never figured that Wichita itself had its own serial killer. So this one was kind of announcing, hey, Wichita has a serial killer. It's not related to these other criminals. And it kind of claimed inspiration from other murderers like Jack the Ripper, Son of Sam, and the Hillside Strangler. That saying stuff like, they did great work, and that's what inspired me to do this sort of stuff. So there was one murder that I forgot to mention when I was listing off all of the murders that he did. So there was one right around 1988, and it was the Fager family. I don't remember exactly how many people were in the family that ended up dying, but Dennis Rader was the one that killed them. And that same year, he wrote a letter again to the media saying that BTK was not the killer of that family, but it was later. And in the letter, he claimed, oh, the killer did admirable work, which in my mind is kind of disgusting. But it was later found that with DNA evidence and, being able to compare the style of writing and of the letters, that BTK was the one that wrote it. So like I said, he stopped writing letters for over a decade. His last letter was 1988. He stopped until 2004. So over a decade later, about 16 years later, he started writing again, because he was no longer in the news. He was no longer getting the attention from the media and from police that he craved. So in 2004, KAKE, where the TV station where he had sent one of his original letters, received a package, a letter with a few other things, and it was kind of a start of a story of sorts called the BTK story. They also received a bunch of fake IDs and a word puzzle that Dennis had created. Again, really trying to get that attention. Then in June of 2004, they received a package containing very graphic descriptions of the Oduro murders, the original murders that Dennis did, all the way back in 1974. So this was 20 years, more than 20 years later. They were finally receiving a lot more detail. And then December of 2004, a package was received by the police station, the Wichita Police, that contained Nancy Fox's driver's license. She was one of the women murdered in 1977. And that had actually been stolen when she was being murdered, or after she was murdered. Dennis took it to really cause the police to struggle with identifying her. And then the final package that was received was in February of 2005. And it was actually a floppy disk. So for people that don't know what a floppy disk is, think of it as just kind of an old-fashioned USB drive. It acts the same sort of way, only it's a little square disk that you would put into computers, into the tower of a computer, and you could save Word documents on it. And that's how you could kind of share files amongst people. And this floppy disk was sent to a Fox affiliate in Wichita. And Dennis had actually asked some friends, asked some people earlier, a few months earlier, if floppy disks could be traced. And I believe he had asked somebody that was a part of the Wichita Police, and they had told him not as far as they were aware. They couldn't be tracked, which is why he had chosen a floppy disk. And one thing that he didn't realize was if you try to delete something off of the floppy disk, it doesn't completely go away. So police were able to find what's called metadata on the disk. And the document that had been attempted to be deleted contained the words Christ Lutheran Church. And that document was last marked as last modified by Dennis. And because Dennis was the president of the church council, and that was his church. And so they were able to do a quick internet kind of Google search, and they were able to find that, make that association. So obviously they knew, okay, Dennis was the most likely last person to own this floppy disk. He's the guy that we need to go talk to. And ultimately they discussed it with him, and I'm not 100% sure if how much he admitted to, but ultimately they were actually able to get DNA evidence that convicted him as the killer. So they were able to find DNA evidence that was under the nails, so like skin cells, hair cells, that sort of thing, was under the nails of Vicky Wegerle. She was the one that was killed in 1986. And they were able to compare it to actually Dennis Rader's daughter. She had had a pap smear, and some cervical cells were collected to do testing, which is not uncommon. And they found in her DNA, there was a familial match between the DNA that was found under Vicky's fingernails and Rader's daughter's pap smear cells. So then they knew it would have been like a parent or a grandparent that would have committed those crimes. So then they started getting DNA from the family, and Dennis Rader was the one that matched. So then he was arrested, and he was given 5 life sentences, and he is currently 77 and still in prison.